Hey, what's good with you? I just wanted to give a quick trigger warning before we get into the video. The subject matter of the book that I'm reviewing is pretty dark. So, two minor characters die by suicide, one of which is depicted on page, and the romance between the two main characters is pretty toxic. I would say that it's an abusive relationship and consent is pretty muddy. I don't go into a lot of detail and I don't dwell on those things, but I do talk about them in this video. So if those things are particularly triggering for you, I'd rather you skip because I may not know you, but your mental well-being is more important to me than getting views. Oh, start a YouTube channel, talk about books, it'll be fun, you'll enjoy it, they said. You guys. Oh yeah, I can't cuss in the beginning of videos. Whoops. I'll probably bleep that out, right? Hey, what's happening? My name is D, and welcome back to another episode of Book Reviews with the Regular Dude. Today, we're going to be talking about Gothikana by RuNyx. But before we get into that, I got to give a shout out to my Plus Ultra Don't Fretter Laughing Cat Dog. Thank you so much for your support on Patreon. Your support means that I'm able to make this content and put it out as frequently as I do. If you also want to support this content and ensure that I'm able to put it out as frequently as I do, or even more frequently, make sure you consider subscribing to my Patreon. Okay, let's get into the review. I don't know why, but it feels like it's been a long time since I reviewed a book. It's probably because I did those Avatar videos. Thank you for watching those if you did. I know that when I talk about stuff that I actually like, people aren't as interested, so appreciate you engaging with that content as well. Gothikana by RuNyx. I hope I'm saying that correctly. That's how it was pronounced in the audiobook. It's, I don't even know what genre it's supposed to be. Hold on a second. Can you tell that I'm like really disorganized and not doing great? So Gothikana is like a dark fantasy, romance, paranormal mystery, new adult book, according to Goodreads. I'm not really getting a lot of fantasy. I would say it's more of like a psychological thriller that isn't very thrilling. While I'm here, I'll just read the premise. The eternal romance of Beauty and the Beast meets the gothic suspense of Dracula in this erotic, dark academia story of epic love from best-selling author RuNyx. I'm gonna tell you right off the bat, I did not get Dracula or Beauty and the Beast vibes. Granted, I haven't read the original Dracula, and I have seen I don't know if I've ever seen Beauty and the Beast. But I guess the male love interest is supposed to be the Beast in that situation. And like, I guess, but also not really. I don't know. So for some weird reason, Goodreads wouldn't let me read the full premise. So I had to go find someone else's like kind of summary of the book. This is from Reddit. A beautiful raven-haired, violet-eyed woman who hears voices gets an acceptance letter to the mysterious Varenmore University where she is drawn to a silvery-eyed teacher. Then some like scary ghost shit happens. That's pretty much the premise of the book. So I'm going to do a 4 C's review, which I haven't done in a minute. So for those of you who don't know or don't remember, the 4 C's are character, conflict, context, and craft. Those are just like 4 different aspects of the story that I kind of go through each one of those, give my thoughts. And then I get into more of like ranting and reading notes that I took as I was reading after that. So the first C is character. And off the jump, I really don't like the characters in this book. Like, not just because I think that one of them's like a bad person, but I don't think that the characters are like characterized well. You know, it's like it's almost like I don't know if campy is the right word, but there's something sort of like shallow and really I want to say the word I want to say the word bombastic, but I don't know if that's right. But there's just really shallow characters, and their motivations are like paper thin. And the main character, her name's Corvina, she's like kind of dumb. But you're told that she's smart, but you don't really see it. And she doesn't like put a lot of things together. You know, she just kind of like goes along with things, and you could chalk that up to the fact that like part of this character's background is the fact that she was raised in the woods by her mom alone. But she's like really infantilized and naive and just doesn't think things through. And there isn't like any real development on page. You know, the narration says that there's development and this is a completely different person from the beginning to the end, but I don't see that. I wasn't shown that. I was just told that. And I think that that's one of my biggest problems with the main character. Like, she doesn't do really terrible things, I don't think. Or at least I don't remember anything that was like, oh, she's a bad person. It's just like stuff just happens to her and she's like, oh, wow, I guess I got to do this now. I don't know if this is a problem because I'm not part of this community. So I can't speak on this with like any authority, but this character Corvina, she hears voices in her head, and her mom and her dad were diagnosed as schizophrenic, but the doctors say that in the book, the doctors say that she's not schizophrenic, but she hears all these voices. And this is a bit of a spoiler, but there's this possibility that these voices are ghosts in her head or something. And I don't know if that's good representation for somebody with schizophrenia. You know, I don't know anybody with schizophrenia. I don't have it, but it just seemed like, oh, I don't know. I don't know how it made me feel kind of weird. Not in a weird like, oh, like this person's hearing voices, but I was just like, is this super disrespectful to people with schizophrenia? You know, I'm like, is this like the schizophrenia version of EDS from Fourth Wing? You know what I'm saying? I just wasn't sure. It made me feel pretty uncomfortable. I didn't like that. And I don't like this character because there's just like nothing to her other than the author. It was really important to the author that we knew that she got some heavy breasts. That phrase came up like 12 times or something like that. I should have kept a tally, but it was ridiculous. And look, I'm not saying that I'm opposed to heavy breasts or something like that, you know? I'm just saying that it was never said in a time where that phrase fit or made sense. It just came out of nowhere. Even in the spicier scenes, I was just like, I don't know. It's a weird way to describe them, I think. And I don't know. It just didn't work for me. And then, you know, like her eyes being purple came up a lot, and people called her Purple Eyes or Purple or whatever. And you spend like 90% of the book in her perspective, and there's still nothing to her. It's like this character is so shallow, or the characterization is so shallow. If Corvina were a puddle, you'd stand in her and your feet wouldn't get wet. You know what I'm saying? And then there's the male love interest, the other main character. His name is Vaude. Like, I hate these names. And he is a horrible person. There's a bit of an age difference in this relationship, but I think the part about it that I really don't like, well, there's so much that I don't like about this character and their relationship, is there's this huge power imbalance. Like, this guy has 100% of the power in this relationship, and he's possessive, and he's controlling, he's manipulative, he's misogynistic, and, you know, like, as the story progresses, there's even more and more and more power that he has over this girl. He's allegedly a teacher at Vermore University or whatever, and he's also super creepy. And then as they like get involved, he like interrogates her about like this other guy that likes her. He like says a bunch of really fucked up stuff. He treats her horribly when they like get down, and he's just like, that alone makes me like hate this character. And, you know, I would have DNF'd this if I wasn't aware that like some of my patrons really wanted to hear my thoughts on it. I also kind of, by the end, it's not that I wanted to know how it ended because I was intrigued, but I was more like, all right, how you gonna fix this? So yeah, like this character, you know, again, his motivations don't make a lot of sense. If there are reasons for his actions outside of misogyny, I don't know what they are. You know, he talks about being this terrible person and this monster, but he doesn't do anything monstrous except for, I would say, like abusing this young woman. This character is like a hyperbolized or hyperbolic combination of every like bad boy, edgy rival, shadow boy, mean guy from Dark Academia trope mashed into one character and then given no depth or like humanity, really, you know? And that's why I was saying, like, I don't know if this book is meant to be campy or something, but the characterization is so shallow. Those are really the only two characters. Those are the only ones we really get to know. By the time like a villain is introduced or revealed or whatever, her motivations are gross and they make no sense. And that's a bit of a spoiler, so I'm going to get into it later on in the video, but just let me tell you, I was like, this is so whack. Like, I'm offended because it's gross, and I'm more offended because it's so dumb. Corvina has some friends at this college. Eventually, she makes like a group of friends, and one of them, her name is Erica. She's like the only black character ever mentioned, and she is just like this horny black woman stereotype. She says girl at the beginning of every sentence, and that was fucking annoying. She's barely in the book, so it's like, if you were doing this just to say that the book is diverse, like, don't waste your time, just don't bother. And the starting every sentence with the word girl is not how black people, or at least not a lot of them, and it's annoying. Like, I'm not going to go so far as to say that this book is racist because she's barely in it, but this is, in my mind, a very poor representation of black women. There's also some like language, I'll get into that later on, but there's some language that's used that just points to the fact that this author hasn't done a lot of anti-racism work in themselves or in their community or whatever. And then like Corvina's like best friend character also says girl a lot. And at that point it's annoying and appropriative. And again, I just like, what are you doing? All right, the next C is conflict. Conflict is like how plot moves forward, and this plot doesn't move forward. It moves side to side. It zigs, it zags, it's up, it's down, it's all over the place. Reads with Rachel, who's kind of like my booktube mentor, if you will, the Dr. Frankenstein of my monster, has said the phrase like word salad when talking about people who write like very atmospheric prose that doesn't make a lot of sense. Like, the air tasted silver and the ground sounded spicy or something like that. Gothikana is like conflict salad, you know what I mean? Like, there's just so many problems and so many loose ends that are never like tied up at the end. And not every book needs to tie up every loose end, but there's so many loose ends that it kind of tells me that the author didn't exactly know what they were doing before they were like, I gotta end this thing, I guess we'll do this. You know what I'm saying? Because there's like ghost shit, and then there's like people vanishing over hundreds of years, and then there's this other shit, and there's other shit, and like all these different like Corvina gets new voices in her head at some point, and it's just like there's so many things going on that, and at the end, like in the epilogue, I guess this is a spoiler, but they're like, yeah, crazy how a bunch of this was never solved. And I'm like, that's just a middle finger to the reader, dog. Like, you know, like a thriller, it's like a thriller. I haven't read a ton of thrillers, but thrillers in like movies and shit, not everything gets answered, but there's like a decent conclusion. And there isn't really one here in Gothikana. There's a conclusion, like things end, but very abruptly. Y'all ever see the movie Nausicaa and the Valley of the Wind? It's a Hayao Miyazaki movie. That shit just ends. Like, it doesn't end. It just stops. And Gothikana does the same thing. Only difference is Nausicaa and the Valley of the Wind is, like, beautiful, artistic. You know, it's a Hayao Miyazaki film. And also, like, the story is really gripping and interesting. So I'll, like, give that shit a pass. This shit is confusing and, like, dark for the sake of dark and upsetting for the sake of being upsetting. And it's like, incoherent. It's just, man, like, wow. I'm going to have to cut this out, but I just kind of trailed off because I was like thinking about how confusing and how like random everything was. But it's like, yeah, it just, I don't have more to say on it than that because it's just like, yeah, it doesn't make a lot of sense and it goes all over the place. I feel like this book was like freestyled. And then they did like line edits to check for spelling errors. I don't know if there were any because, you know, I listened to it. I didn't physically read it. When I was looking for the premise, I saw that somebody said it was like a bad Wattpad novel or a bad AO3 novel. I don't know shit about Wattpad or AO3, but I feel like this is giving them a bad name. Yeah, let's move on to context. Context is like world building. So I do a lot of like fantasy novels and stuff like that. So there would be like, what is this world and how does magic work and all that kind of stuff. This, it's like there's maybe 2 settings. It's Varenmore University and like they go to the post office one time. Varenmore University, it's not really a world. It's in some country. It was never clear to me whether it was like America or somewhere else. And like, you know, I talk about politics and stuff like that. Something that stuck out to me in this one is like, I feel like it's supposed to be set in this world, our world or whatever. And there's like ghosts and there's like hallucinations and all that stuff, but it's never made clear whether or not these are like figments of Corvina's imagination or if there's actual like ghost shit and magic, you know, and like there's some other magic or whatever, but it turns out to just be drugs. So I don't know if I can really analyze a lot of magic here. But I will say that like at one point it comes up in my notes, but there one of the character's older brothers is an investigator on the investigation squad. That really stuck out to me because I was like, do you not know like what police are and like how police work? Because I feel like if you're gonna have a detective character, you should at least figure out how like the hierarchy of police work, or if this person works for like the FBI or CIA or like CSIS or something like that, then you could have done a little bit of research into what that is, because this character is not a major character, but they're involved and they bring up this squad and he seems to have a lot of authority. So I'm like, okay, but how does any of this work? And it was never explained, never delved into it. It felt like they're just like, yeah, we're going to have like a cop, but we're not going to say cop because ACAB. But what else do we call it? The investigation squad. Honestly, when it came to like the ghost shit and the voices and everything, I was like kind of okay with none of that being answered, or at least I would have been, except that the book goes back and talks about how mystical and strange and wrong Varenmore University is, and all these like things happen there and how it affects people. It brings out all these like bad things or whatever. And I really didn't like that, because that really points out how these things are not like explained. And that doesn't mean that the book is mysterious or confusing. It just means like, hey, look at all this like incomplete shit that I left. And I don't think that that makes for like a more mysterious book or a more like intellectually superior piece of work or something like that. It just, I think there's complex and layered where it's been done in a really thoughtful way, in a way where there's many interpretations of a book, or you're left with unanswered questions, but you're left not being like, what the fuck happened, but like, oh, maybe these different things happened, and it'd be like, you know, worth discussing with somebody else. But I feel like if you read this at a book club, you would all be like, y'all get what happened? And a bunch of people like, nah. You know what I mean? Okay, and then the last C is craft. I like have nothing to say about this. That's not true. I have a couple things I can say. It's like nothing really stood out to me as far as lines like she ran like she was running from something, but I wasn't like wowed by anything. I think new adult is a really interesting category for books because like it reads a lot like young adult, but there's like full on sex scenes. I think they swear a little bit more. I think that's like Red Tower Books' whole thing. I don't think this is a Red Tower book. I didn't look it up. I don't care. But I'm just saying like Red Tower Books does a lot of new adult stuff, and it reads like YA, sounds like YA, where the character's narration is kind of juvenile and adolescent, but also like they like have full on sex scenes and they cuss a lot more. So that's kind of what this writing style is. But even then, I would say that this is juvenile, even for YA. It's like middle grade writing, or writing that would work for middle grade, but also erotica, which is a weird combination. I don't like making that, but that's just what it kind of came down to. From a line by line perspective, reads very juvenile. You know, I teach poetry and creative writing classes from time to time, and my students write better line by line. And then you add in the paper thin characterization and the sloppy and inconclusive plot, and it's just not good. So that was my 4Cs review. I try to make that like spoiler free so that, you know, if you are interested based off of what I said, you can go check it out for yourself. From this point on, I am going to spoil it. I'm going to read the notes that I took as I read the book. So just a heads up, ordinarily when I do these rant reviews where I like read my notes that I read as I was reading, I usually mark down what chapter I'm on, but I didn't do this because the first couple of chapters really blended together for me. So then I was just like, whatever. So it's not quite as organized as I usually am or would like to be, but also this video isn't as organized or neat as I would like it to be, because I forgot that I needed to film today. Right off the dome, the title of my notes is Gothikana's notes, not Gothikana notes, and I just think that's funny. So prologue 1, we meet Vaude when he's like, I don't know, 8. He's in an orphanage, and a woman named Zelda, who's blind but like has visions of the future or something, told him to look out for a castle and a woman with purple eyes. This line stuck out to me: black, the absence of color, the keeper of dark. And then my commentary is, this is like fake deep, fake profound. Corvina's only friends are crows, and her mom heard voices, but she's totally fine. And she loves books, so you know that she's the MC and the protagonist. We get into the main story, and Corvina gets a letter inviting her to a college nobody's ever heard of. And she's like, I'll make friends there, and maybe I'll meet a boy. Let's go. So the author's really beating us over the head with the foreshadowing from Prologue 1, with like the reference to her eyes and the fact that this college is on a castle or whatever. So Corvina travels to the village below the castle and then takes a taxi up there, and the taxi driver tells her that everybody who stays at the castle goes insane. Corvina meets her roommate, who nicknames her Cor, and apparently her roommate last year died by suicide after hooking up with her professor, Deverall, who is Vaude. And then Corvina unpacks her stuff, and her tarot deck, she reads tarot, falls out, and one card falls out and is upturned, and it's the death card. And you're like, ooh, suspenseful. And I don't know, there's something about like I own a couple of tarot decks, and I have a bunch of friends who read and stuff like that. So I'm not knocking tarot. I just think there's something about using it in this way where it's just really obvious that the author's trying to like be witchy and also like create suspense. I don't know. It just didn't work for me. I thought it was really, I just didn't like it. So it's still the first night. It's 2 a.m. Corvina hears music and she goes to investigate. And I notice, because she's never seen a horror movie, there's a guy playing piano up in the top of the tower that she's like living in, because the dorms are in like different towers and shit. And this guy is described as beautiful in the way that pain is beautiful. And my note is, call me old fashioned, but if somebody looks like pain, I avoid them. And then my follow-up notes is like, willing to bet this is Deverall or whatever, probably Vaude, gonna notice the purple eyes and freak out and walk away. And then I was immediately wrong. He knew she was there the whole time and yelled at her to get the fuck away, and she just like runs. So I think it's like the next day or a couple days later, Vaude is Corvina's literature teacher, and she feels lust for a real person for the first time, which is cringy and strange. And they want to fuck each other, and everybody noticed, and I wonder what's going to happen. It's funny reading my own notes and seeing how I'm losing patience. Apparently, Vaude is responsible for people going missing. That's what June, I think the roommate's name is. I think it's June. Whatever. Corvina sees a crow, and she follows the crow through the woods right by the castle to a lake, and then Vaude is there. Like, and I didn't like write down a quote, but I had a note here that just says like, Vaude is described through a very misogynistic lens. And I think that someone can jump on that and be like, well, he's a guy, how can he be described through a misogynistic lens? And what I mean is like, you know, if you know what toxic femininity is, it's where somebody uses like femininity to reinforce misogyny, or like looking at it through a patriarchal lens, as in like, this guy meets the male beauty standard according to patriarchy and misogyny. That's what I mean. Like, look, if you're into like chiseled jaw, 6'4", big muscles, all that stuff, I'm not trying to yuck your yum or whatever. I'm not calling you a misogynist necessarily. I'm just saying that like the way that there's such a big focus on his muscles and his jaw, especially his like forearms and shit, and like his bulge gets brought up a lot. I'm just like, okay, like I get it, chill. Read some bell hooks or whatever, dog. Like, this is weird. Corvina goes back to the campus through the woods, and everyone thinks that she had sex with Vaude. And for the next week, Vaude kind of stalks Corvina, like he follows her around, and she just feels him watching her wherever, and she's kind of into it, which I think is really fucked up. And I don't know who says this line, but those eyes whisper dirty things, and I'm just like, ugh, that is so cringy. I hate it. Vaude is also like, you know, like, oh, you don't want nothing to do with me. I'm the bad boy. So he says, steer clear of me, little crow, because he gives her a fucking nickname. I hate that trope in romance where the guy who's an asshole gives the protagonist, who's usually a woman, a nickname she didn't consent to, and it's usually very infantilizing or it's making fun of her, and I think it's super like that's shitty. Like, don't treat people like that, you know? Anyways, he says, steer clear of me, little crow. You may be a luring siren, but I'm no ordinary sailor. I'm a mad pirate. If I land on your shores, I will plunder and take everything worth having. And I don't know. Something about the fact that they're nowhere near a boat makes this analogy really weird to me. And also, it goes on for a little too long. And I don't know, there's something about like somebody proclaiming, I'm a mad pirate, that just, it's so cringe. Like, this book makes me cringe, you know? I don't know if it's the worst one I've ever read, because I read Taken by the T-Rex. That wasn't just a lie. I actually read that shit. This is slightly better than that. Erica, the only black character, is a horny stereotype. I already said that, but, you know... Again, I'm not going to be like, oh, this book is racist or whatever, but I do take issue with, you know, I feel like the fact that there's one character and then this character is such a non-character, and the little time that she has on page is this portrayal, I think makes it worse than if there were no black characters at all. On campus, there's this legend about like 5 students kidnapping and sexually assaulting and sacrificing villagers for like some kind of ritual. And then other students found them and lynched them. This is what I was talking about before when I said like there's some language here that makes me a little uncomfortable. Is like every time they talk about how these people were killed, they say the word lynched. And I know that lynching happened to other people, but there's just something about it that made me uncomfortable. And that might just be like generational trauma, but it just seemed like you could have used other words. That was a choice, and it was a choice that was made repeatedly, and I just didn't like it. Corvina goes on a walk in the woods, and she finds 15 unmarked graves, and then my note is this plot is a lot of and that's like a storytelling thing where you know, they say effective storytelling is where like this happens, but then this happens, but then this happens. So it's a lot of like moving the plot forward through conflict and how they're going to overcome this, but then. And then there's like sloppy storytelling where it's like, and then this happens, and then this happens, and then this happens. And I think sometimes and then can work, especially when it's a kind of book that's more about the vibes than about the plot. Like, you know, I would say The Starless Sea is kind of and then storytelling, but that felt way more the point. And then on this walk, she finds something covered by a tarp, and this line stuck out to me. The tarp was new, which means it was recent. And this is a bit of a nitpick, but that's really redundant. Like, of course, you know, like Corvina sets out to be a detective a lot, and she is not equipped to do that. And so she like lifts up the tarp, and it's an old piano. And Corvina's like, there's only one motherfucker who knows what pianos are. Corvina goes to the library on campus, and a boy scares her, and he says like, they're here, the Slayers or whatever. And then Vaude shows up, and they take the time to describe like his long legs, his thick thighs, and his bulge. And he like fingers Corvina a little bit. I'm going to get into this a little bit more in a second, but I was like, this is so weird. Later in lit class, they talk about death and character death. And, you know, I was like, I don't know if you're trying to foreshadow something, but I can tell, you know, neither one of these characters is actually going to die. You don't have the guts. You don't have what it takes. Corvina and her roommate and like 5 dudes go into the woods, and they explore, and they see a shack with a shadow inside of it, like a long silhouette. They say that a couple times. Later that night, Corvina has a nightmare where she sees her mom, and her mom says that only the devil will keep her safe. And she wakes up, and she goes to the spot in the woods where she found Vaude's piano, and Vaude's there, and he tells her not to look at her like that. She's just looking at you, dog. And then he tells her that women who get involved with him dance with death sooner than they should. Nobody talks like this. Like, it's just, I think because every other character around these people talk in a very colloquial way, the fact that this guy busts out this really bad poetry makes it even more awkward and cringy than it needed to be. They make out a little bit, and then Vaude with the bod, because that's what I called him, regrets it, and Corvina leaves, and her tarot cards are knocked over, and there are 3 facing up this time: the devil, the lovers, and the tower. More foreshadowing. And again, I don't know. I feel like it's just really on the nose with the tarot card usage or whatever. And I don't know. It just feels really like telegraphing. Corvina needs to go to town to deliver a letter to her mom, who is alive. I thought she was dead. So that was like, okay, you got me there. Thought she was dead. But she's just gone. But she's in a psychiatric ward. So Vaude is the only person who's available to drive her into town or whatever. And so he drives her. She talks to this old lady at the post office who's lived in the town and knows all about the castle. So then Vaude and Corvina drive back up the mountain, and he mentions that the graves that Corvina found are actually empty. I don't know how he knows that. And they eventually get caught on a storm in the mountain, or in a storm on the mountain. And so they got to pull over, otherwise they're going to die because like it's just like not safe driving conditions. So they very slowly etch their way up until there's this space where they can pull off and they park. And they're kind of stuck there for a while. So then Vaude goes to have a smoke because he's a bad boy. And he forgets a lighter. And it's like a funny trope in like all media where smokers like never have a lighter. And I don't remember what stand-up comedian had this bit, but I remember as a kid they were talking about like smokers are so disorganized because they have the smokes, but they're always like, do you have a light? And like not a lot of people smoke anymore. And I remember thinking that when like I remember hearing that bit when I was like 13. And I was smoking then. So then I always had a lighter on me. To this day, like I always know where a lighter is. I don't smoke anymore. Corvina offers him a match because she always has matches on her because, you know, lighting candles because she's so witchy. And then my note says, I swear if they fuck here. And then they start fucking. And Vaude says, you picked the wrong person for your first time, Lil Crow. Too late now. And this gives me such an ick. Like the fact that he's so attracted to the fact that she's a virgin. Like he like almost loses it when he finds out that this woman's a virgin. And then the infantilizing nickname doesn't help in this situation. And the consent seems really muddy. Like if I was mid the deed with someone and they were like, yo, this is the bad choice, homie, I'd be like, okay, well, this is over. I'm going to run away screaming now. And this is something I want to talk about is like this book really doesn't take the time in its like spicy scenes to like they're like consent isn't really thought of or brought up here. And again, the power dynamic between these two, because Corvina is so like she's not that much younger than him, but she's much more naive and she's much less experienced and she doesn't have a lot of social power or money or anything like that. And later on it's revealed that she is at Varenmore because Vaude made someone send her an invitation because he already knew who she was. So this all feels so orchestrated. And so like this really bothered me as in like, you know, it like I understand that some people read like dark romance and stuff like that because it helps them work out trauma in an environment where they know they're not in any physical danger and stuff like that. And so I don't want to like shame anybody for that or whatever. So I'm not going to say don't read dark romance. I think that I just don't like that that consent is really ignored in this book. And a lot of these characters' interactions are very, it's blurring a line that I think should be very clear. What came to mind when I was reading this was that like the other dark romance fantasy, this is barely a fantasy, but the other dark romance fantasy that I read on this channel was A Court of Sugar and Spice by Rebecca F. Kenny. I also read the sequel and told my two best friends about it, but that's on Patreon. A Court of Sugar and Spice, Rebecca F. Kenny has a CNC scene. That's almost a tongue twister. But there's so much conversation around consent and safe words and shit like that I wasn't like, I wasn't uncomfortable between these two like love interests, having this like fantasy role play thing. And then there were like threats of sexual violence in that book too. I'm not saying like it's crystal clear, squeaky clean, but it's like that was like a villainous, monstrous thing that the characters in that book would threaten. Sexual assault was never depicted on page there. I think one of the main characters, Louisa, was a little too forward with her love interest Lear, and so that's a little fuzzy, but there was no like, but anyways, in this one all of their interactions are fuzzy, and it makes me super uncomfortable. And there were no trigger warnings at the beginning of this book. And so I'm like, this feels muddy and irresponsible. And because this is something that people like go to dark romance for, I would think that you'd want to be more careful so they know what they can get into and what they're able to handle, right? So this feels irresponsible, and good God, do I hate this character. So they're in the middle of fucking, and Corvina hears one of the voices in her head, and it's the main voice that she's always heard, and she calls it Mo. So she's like, "What, Mo?" And then Vod's like, "Who the fuck is Mo?" And then they finish, and then Vod's like angry. He's like, I need to know who Mo is." And he says, "I need to know her secrets, but she can never know mine." He's so edgy. It's fucking annoying. The idea of like, I need to have all this power over her, but I'm not going to be vulnerable or open with her. I think that's just like, I don't know. It's so fucking, there's a lot of romanticizing like borderline abuse in this book. And it's just, ugh, I hate it so much. Weeks after their bang session, Corvina goes to the library with Jax, a side character that I'm convinced is going to die, but also he likes her. And she sneaks off to pick out some romance novels, and Vaude grabs her and starts making out with her without her consent, and then demanding to know if she and Jax have had sex. And she basically tells him to fuck off. Or like, while she's having this conversation, she starts hearing like voices and sees a shadow or something. And so she runs to the courtyard or whatever, and she sees her friend Troy on this tower. And he dies by suicide the same way as, I think her name, the roommate's ex-roommate. As soon as this dude is dead, Corvina hears his voice in her head, says, "Tell my brother." And then Vaude brings Corvina to his room. And then it's like, "I'm going to go work out for a little bit. Don't try to leave." And then my note is, I don't know. He's a bad person and a bad character. He's not interesting or compelling. And personally, I think the descriptions of how dark and sexy he is are uninspired and basic. And on top of that, like, just the way he asserts power and dominance over this woman, it just doesn't sit right with me. Corvina finds where Vaude moves the piano and then falls asleep and wakes up to him playing, and he tells her to tell him about her time at the Morningstar Institute. Morningstar, Lucifer, the devil, so gothic and edgy and scary. Ooh. And he's so misogynistic. He's like, "Tell me about it and I'll make you come." I posted this in my Discord, but there's just something really weird and unsettling about like having this scene where this woman has to talk about her like traumatic childhood, her childhood trauma, and some of her deepest insecurities and fears while getting eaten out sitting on top of a piano. What the fuck is that? And then my next note is, okay, so not a major plot point, but I think Troy's brother is an investigator with the International Investigation Squad. Come on. Corvina meets the brother, and he knew Vaude when they were kids, and he knew about the old lady from Prologue 1, who reveals that Vaude is the heir to Varenmore. The Heronmore, am I right? I'm sorry, I don't know. I must have been feeling really... I bet I was so proud of myself for writing that note, too. That is so dumb. Corvina's like really shocked by this secret that he basically owns the castle, owns the property, owns the mountain, and she tries to run from him, and he chases her, catches her, and then assaults her, basically, and shouts, "I am your madness." And again, I was thinking about Rebecca F. Kenney, and I was like, she did a way better job of like managing consent, and there were trigger warnings at the beginning of A Court in Sugar and Spice. I'm pretty sure. There was definitely a trigger warning like before a specific chapter in A Court of Hearts and Hunger. And I just think that if you're going to deal with subject matter like this, you need to be responsible and put in these kind of trigger warnings, man, because this is like muddy as fuck. The voices in Corvina's head tell her to find them, and she has a dream and thinks that the corpses are in the lake. So she tells that to Vaude, and he has the lake searched because he owns the place or whatever. And they find 14 of the 15 missing people. or whatever. And then the voice says, "You didn't find me, you're next." At some point, the voice tells her to go back to the old shack, and she goes in there and she finds a half-burnt corpse. The night of the black ball, it comes up. It's on an ink moon, and Vaude buys Corvina a dress. I don't know, dress talk is, I hate this book. Jade, that's the roommate's name, is Jade, and another girl named Rory go missing, and they find the other girl in a lake, and they save her from drowning, and she's like, I don't know how I got there, it was crazy, wow, whoa, crazy. Never gets addressed. Also, the boy that Corvina saw in the library, that never gets addressed either. Troy's brother calls in and says, like, oh, we identified the corpse from the shack, and it's Jade. So like, oh, what's going on here? And then Corvina gets hit over the head, and she wakes up on top of the tower that Troy jumped off of, and it's revealed that the roommate is not Jade. She's actually Vaude's cousin, and the reason that the two people that she knew died by suicide, she used the devil's breath on them, which is like a compound made from a plant that brainwashes you and makes you do whatever someone says, like involuntarily. She wants to kill Corvina because she wants Vaude all for herself. Again, when I say Vaude's cousin, I think they have like the same grandparents, and Vaude doesn't know her. So then when Vaude like figures it all out, he like pretends to be super into her for a second. And like her reasoning for, she's like, we both have Deverall blood that makes us strong. And I was like, that's such a weird thing to say, especially in a context where, like, you know, in a fantasy novel where there's like magic and shit, I would almost get it if they meant like the magic power in our family is really powerful. But there's nothing like that here. So it's just like, what do you mean by strong? So then Vaude kills her, and then Corvina like starts like she starts having a meltdown. All the voices get really loud, and she ends up having to go back to the mental institute for a while. The doctor there promises Vaude that she doesn't have schizophrenia, but it might manifest later in life. Vaude says that he's in love with her and that they're gonna get married one day. She gets out of the hospital, they get married, they get a dog, and then, you know, it's been a few years since everything went down, none of which is wrapped up, by the way. It just ends, and then they decide that they should go back to Varenmore. I guess there's a happily ever after, but like how we get from the climax to there is just like this to this, and it's just so, ugh. Whoo! Oh, it was upsetting. So was it good? No. Did I enjoy it? No. Would I recommend it? Nah, never. This is definitely not the worst book that I've read for this channel. I think that goes to Iron Flame for sure. But it's down there or up there, whatever. I was disturbed, but not in the ways that I think the author intended. I want to see how it ended, but not because I was intrigued. I think the romance is toxic, and it glorifies toxicity and borderline abuse. I don't think any of the plot lines were really all that well thought out or executed. And yeah, I just don't think that this is, I just wouldn't recommend this to anybody because I don't think it's worth a read. So my camera died. I don't know if my closing thoughts really made it, but just in case, yeah, I didn't like that book. Thank you so much for watching this video, especially if you made it to the end. If you like this video, please give it a thumbs up. If you're new to my channel, please subscribe. If you want to support the channel and gain exclusive access to content you won't find anywhere else, make sure you consider subscribing to my Patreon. There you'll get an extra rant review video from me once per month, as well as access to my private Discord server, the Don't Fret Club Discord server, where you can chat with me, bunch of other really lovely people. These are some of the sweetest people I've ever met on the internet. We talk about books, anime, movies, D&D, video games, whatever. We're also doing a book club together now. So this month we're reading Silver Under Nightfall by Rin Chapeko, and we're going to do a live stream and talk about it. It's going to be a lot of fun. So if any of that sounds interesting or exciting, make sure you consider subscribing to my Patreon. Special shout out to my super duper don't fretters, Keisha, Cassie, Sable, Knightsmith, and Oliver. Thank you for supporting me and ensuring that I'm able to put out this content as frequently as I do. Everybody else, thank you so much for watching this video. My name is D. Don't fret. I'll see you next time. Peace out.